Welcome to my channel, where we share some of the most captivating sci-fi stories. Before we dive in, I just want to say, these stories take a lot of time and effort to create for you. All I ask in return is that you subscribe to the channel and give the videos a like. Under the fractured glow of the station's artificial lights, the bazaar smelled of rust, ozone, and too many bodies packed too close. Kale threaded through the crowd, one hand on his satchel and the other brushing the sidearm hidden under his coat. The coat was 2 sizes too large and carried the scent of cheap sealant, but it gave him the illusion of being bigger, tougher, and maybe someone not to pickpocket. Illusion was the only thing he could afford. His ship was docked 3 levels up, and the station authority had given him exactly 12 hours to pay overdue docking fees before they started stripping it for parts. Kale had come down here to trade for something valuable, spare reactor cores, maybe, or a miracle. But he'd settled for a packet of synthetic coffee that claimed to taste like Earth sunrise. He didn't know what Earth sunrise tasted like, but he suspected it wasn't battery acid with hints of despair. "Move along, human," a vendor croaked, pushing a tray of blinking insect larvae toward him. "Special protein, very chewy." Kale winced, raising his hands in surrender. "I don't eat food that tries to look back at me, thanks." He pushed deeper into the market, trying to ignore the way the overhead plasma lamps flickered like they were deciding whether today was the day to explode. The place had a nervous rhythm to it, traders shouting, alarms in the distance, the clang of metal boots on grated floors. It was chaos with a price tag, and Kale had grown used to navigating chaos. He had to. Chaos was the only thing that never demanded interest payments. That was when he heard it, sharp voices, guttural, followed by the metallic grind of cages being shifted. He should have ignored it. He had 12 hours before the docking authority stripped his ship to the bolts, and curiosity had never once paid a bill. But Kale's feet had a treacherous habit of walking toward trouble. He slipped into a side corridor where the lights dimmed further, the air colder, the stench sharper. It was a section of the bazaar not meant for casual visitors. A heavy curtain of synth leather hung across a doorway, muffling the sound inside. Kale peeked through a tear in the curtain and immediately regretted it. Cages, rows of them. Some held creatures he didn't recognize, scaled, feathered, shivering, angry. Others held beings unmistakably sentient, though drugged into silence. Slavers. He hated slavers. Not because of some noble code, though he liked to pretend. It was because he'd once been drunk enough to gamble at one of their tables and lost 3 months of wages. He never forgave them for that. At the far end of the hall stood the prize of the auction. She couldn't have been more than 14, though Kale had never been good at guessing alien ages. She looked almost human, though not quite. Her skin carried a faint shimmer as though moonlight lived beneath it, and her hair, silver, not dyed but silver by nature, fell in straight sheets down her back. The most striking feature, however, were her ears. Long, elegant, sweeping back with a delicate curve that caught the light. She stood upright in her cage, eyes wide but unbroken. They were violet, deep and unsettling, like someone had distilled twilight into a stare. High-value stock. The auctioneer boomed, a reptilian creature with too many teeth and an echo in his voice. Rare specimen from the Lurie line, strong genetics, perfect condition. Bidding starts at. Kale didn't wait to hear the number. He knew 2 things immediately. First, he couldn't afford her. Second, he wasn't leaving without her. His brain argued against this. Walk away, Kale, walk away. Pay your fees, drink your terrible coffee, and forget this ever happened. His heart, or maybe whatever passed for it after years of poor decisions, shoved him forward anyway. He reached for his blaster under the coat, whispered a quiet prayer to the gods of jammed triggers, and barged into the room. "All right," he shouted, voice cracking in a way that did not inspire confidence. "The auction's over." Dozens of eyes turned toward him, slavers, buyers, guards, silence. Kale cleared his throat. "I'll be taking that one." He pointed dramatically at the girl. One of the guards laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound. "You and what army?" Kale swallowed, then raised his blaster. Me and this slightly used army surplus plasma pistol that sometimes works when you beg nicely. He pulled the trigger. It sparked, coughed, and fired a bolt that scorched the ceiling but at least looked impressive. The room erupted into chaos. Shouts, curses, the crackle of energy weapons. Kale dove behind a cage, the alien inside. A furry quadruped with 6 eyes snarled at him. Yeah, I'll get to you later, Kale muttered, fumbling with his blaster. He fired again, this time hitting a light fixture. Sparks rained down, plunging the room into semi-darkness. Buyers scrambled for the exit. Guards advanced. Kale, with the grace of a drunken spider, scrambled toward the girl's cage. "Hey," he whispered, kneeling by the lock. "Name?" She blinked at him. "Serenia." Her voice was soft, melodic, and far too calm for the situation. "Great. I'm Kale. If we live through the next 3 minutes, remind me to teach you how to complain properly." He fiddled with the lock, which stubbornly refused to open. "Any chance you've got hidden lockpicking powers?" She tilted her head, ears twitching slightly. "You're very bad at this." "Yeah, thanks, I know." He yanked harder. A lucky blaster shot from across the room struck the cage's control panel, shorting it. The door hissed open. Kale blinked. "See, all part of the plan." Serenia stepped out gracefully, even in the chaos, her violet eyes never leaving his face. For a second, Kale forgot the blaster fire. Then another bolt sizzled past his head and reminded him painfully of reality. "Run!" he barked. They sprinted through the curtain, down the corridor, weaving through the market. Shouts followed, heavy boots clanging. Kale fired blindly behind him, hitting nothing but a stack of larvae trays which burst open and spilled squirming protein across the floor. Vendors screamed. One slipped on the mess and fell with a crash. Serenia glanced back once, then at him. "You are very clumsy." Kale grinned despite the burning in his lungs. "Yeah, but effective, sometimes." They barreled up a staircase, dodging more guards, until they burst into the docking bay where his ship, the Wayfarer's Folly, waited like a loyal, rusting dog. The ship's hull was patched with mismatched plates. Its engines groaned louder than Kale after cheap liquor, but it was home. He smacked the panel, the ramp lowering with an ear-splitting whine. "Ladies first." Serenia paused, gaze flicking over the battered freighter. "This flies." "Usually," Kale said, ushering her aboard. "Don't worry, she's got character." The guards were closing in as Kale dashed up the ramp. He slammed the controls, the ramp rising just as blaster bolts scorched the metal. Inside, sparks flew from an overloaded circuit. "Strap in," he shouted, leaping into the pilot's chair. Serenia settled beside him, calm as ever, her violet eyes watching him like she wasn't sure whether to laugh or pray. Kale gripped the controls, whispered to the ship, "Don't fail me now, girl," and hit the thrusters. The Wayfarer's Folly shuddered, groaned, and then, miraculously lifted off, streaking out of the docking bay into the star-studded black. Kale exhaled, a shaky grin spreading across his face. "See, easy, piece of cake." Serenia arched a silver brow. "What is cake?" He laughed. "Stick around. You'll hate it." The Wayfarer's Folly shivered like a sick animal as it punched through the upper atmosphere of the station's orbital path. Panels rattled, alarms wailed in multiple languages, and one of the engine readouts flashed an angry red. Kale smacked the console. "Don't give me that attitude," he growled at the flickering screen. "You've survived worse. Remember that time with the Iron Storm, and the other time with the pirate gunship, and that one with the drunk customs officer who vomited in the cargo hold. You're tougher than this." The ship groaned in reply, as though disagreeing with his optimistic memory. Beside him, Serenia sat with perfect posture, hands folded neatly in her lap, as if she were watching a stage play rather than fleeing for her life. She hadn't buckled the safety harness, hadn't clutched the armrest, hadn't even blinked at the sparks shooting from the ceiling panel. Kale glanced at her and frowned. "You know, for someone who just got broken out of a cage, you're awfully calm." Her violet eyes slid to him. "You are making many mistakes, it's distracting." Kale blinked. Mistakes. Excuse me, I just pulled off the galaxy's least planned prison break. That takes skill. She tilted her head, ears twitching slightly. You nearly burned yourself on the control panel. You forgot to disengage the landing clamps, and this ship smells odd. Kale sniffed the recycled air and winced. Yeah, that's probably the coolant leak mixed with the instant noodles. Character Serenia, that's what you're smelling, pure character. For the first time, her lips curved into the smallest hint of a smile. It startled him more than the blaster fire they'd just dodged. He punched coordinates into the nav system, which took its sweet time calculating. The display sputtered and flashed. Warning, hyperdrive calibration incomplete. Kale muttered, incomplete my ass. You'll calibrate when I say you calibrate. He leaned over and slapped the console again, which made the warning vanish. See, problem solved. Serenia's gaze lingered on him. Are humans always this reckless? Only the interesting ones. He grinned, though his fingers tightened on the controls as the stars stretched, warped, and the ship lurched into hyperspace. The sudden silence was almost unsettling after the chaos of the station. Only the hum of the drive filled the cabin now. Kale let out a long breath and leaned back. His shoulders ached, his hands shook, and adrenaline buzzed through him like bad coffee. He stole a glance at Serenia, who sat in perfect calm, her luminous skin faintly catching the blue glow of the hyperlanes outside. For the first time, he noticed how fragile she looked, her limbs slender, her frame delicate. But there was steel in her gaze, a steadiness he rarely saw in grown soldiers, let alone someone her age. "All right," he said, dragging a hand down his face. "We're safe, for the moment. Now ground rules first. Don't touch anything that sparks. Second, if the ship makes a noise like it's dying, ignore it. It's just her way of asking for attention. And third," he paused, realizing he didn't actually have a third rule. "Don't eat the coffee packs." Serenia tilted her head. Coffee. Kale rummaged in a drawer and tossed her a foil packet. She caught it neatly, studying it like a puzzle box. Dehydrated. Add hot water, supposedly tastes like joy. In reality, tastes like boiled shoe. She opened it, sniffed, and wrinkled her nose. It smells wrong. See, quick learner. Kale grinned. For a few minutes, silence settled between them. Kale busied himself checking system diagnostics, most of which told him things he didn't want to know. Serenia studied the hyperstream through the viewport, her long ears twitching occasionally as though listening to something beyond human hearing. Finally she spoke, "Why did you help me?" Kale froze. He knew the question was coming, but somehow hoped she wouldn't ask it so soon. He shrugged, trying to sound casual. "Didn't like the daycare. Thought the place could use fewer cages." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "That is not the real reason." "Maybe not." He leaned back, staring at the streaking stars. "But it's the one I'm sticking with. Call it a hobby. Annoying slavers, rescuing strangers, almost getting shot. Cheaper than therapy." She didn't smile this time, but her gaze softened. "In my people's tongue, there is a word, Severin. It means one who interferes with fate, even when they should not." Kale chuckled. "Yeah, that's me. Captain Kale, professional interferer. Rates are reasonable but no refunds." The hyperdrive hummed louder, a sharp shudder running through the ship. Kale cursed under his breath and adjusted the stabilizers. The ship had a knack for misbehaving right when he wanted to look competent. "Does it always sound like this?" Serenia asked, gripping her seat lightly. "Absolutely. Perfectly normal, like a cat purring." "It sounds like a cat dying." Kale smirked. "Depends on the cat." The shudder passed, the hum steadied, and the ship returned to its usual complaints. Kale exhaled and allowed himself a small laugh. "See. Everything under control. You stick with me, Serenia, and you'll be fine." She tilted her head again, those long ears framing her face in the glow of the stars. "You believe that?" He hesitated, then smiled. "Nope. But it sounds reassuring, doesn't it?" The girl's quiet laugh, sharp and musical, filled the cabin, and for a moment Kale forgot the slavers, the debts, the failing engines. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like he was running alone. Kale had learned, Over years of flying second-hand ships through worse-than-second-hand systems, that hyperspace was the loneliest kind of quiet. The stars stretched into streams outside the viewport, the hum of the drive became the only heartbeat, and time stretched in ways the body didn't understand. For most travelers, that quiet drove them half-mad. For Kale, it was just another Tuesday. Serenia, however, didn't seem disturbed in the slightest. She sat cross-legged on the floor of the cockpit, eyes closed, ears angled back slightly as though listening to something Kale couldn't hear. Her silver hair pooled like liquid metal on the decking. Kale had seen priests meditate, smugglers sleep with one eye open, even mercenaries mutter war chants before a fight, but whatever Serenia was doing didn't fit any of those. She looked still, like she belonged to the silence itself. Kale rubbed at his stubble and muttered to himself, and here I thought I'd finally rescued someone normal. Figures. Her violet eyes flicked open. Normal. He nearly jumped out of his seat. Stars above don't do that. What are you, part bat? She frowned. What is a bat? Kale waved his hand. Never mind. Just don't sneak up on me with your creepy quiet meditation, all right? I've got a nervous heart. You are very noisy when you think, Serenia said, tilting her head. Your thoughts leak into your voice. Kale opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was something about the way she said it, calm and factual, that made him squirm. He turned back to the console, poking at a diagnostic screen that had been flashing fuel efficiency critical for the last 20 minutes. Yeah, well, lucky for you. Noisy thoughts pay the bills. They do not, she answered deadpan. Kale blinked at her, then barked a laugh. All right, fine, you got me. They don't. But they keep me company, which is more than I can say for most passengers. The ship gave a judder like a hiccup, and Kale smacked the console on instinct. The warning light flickered out. Serenia raised one elegant brow. That cannot be proper maintenance. It's traditional maintenance, Kale countered. Passed down from captain to captain since the dawn of spaceflight. When something doesn't work, hit it until it respects you. Her lips curved, just slightly, but enough that Kale felt ridiculously proud of himself. They drifted like that for hours, the silence broken only by Kale's occasional muttering and Serenia's unnervingly sharp questions. She asked about human customs, about the odd pictures taped to the console, old crew, long gone, faces Kale didn't much like thinking about, and about the small brass key he wore around his neck. The weeks that followed were a strange sort of routine, woven out of hyperspace jumps, scrounged supplies, and shared silence that was neither awkward nor lonely. Kale piloted the Wayfarer's Folly like a man half in love with chaos and half terrified of it, while Serenia studied the stars, occasionally making notes in a small, silver notebook she had produced from somewhere within her robes. She never told him what she wrote. Kale assumed it was either alien poetry or a list of ways to scold him properly. One evening, after a jump that had left their stomachs floating somewhere between the second and third vertebrae, Kale leaned back in his chair, surveying the small mess of the cockpit. Sparks flickered from a worn panel, and the control screens hummed with static. Ship's tired, he muttered, rubbing his temples. You'd think 100 years of human ingenuity could make a freighter that doesn't complain when you breathe too hard. Serenia watched him, sitting cross-legged on the floor with her notebook balanced on her knees. Your freighter is alive, she said calmly. You are lucky. Most humans destroy what they do not understand. Kale laughed. Yeah, and I'm lucky most humans don't live past 25 without dying of stupidity. He leaned forward, fiddling with a dial that sparked violently before settling. See, alive, survived another day, against all odds. She tilted her head, long ears catching the flicker of the emergency lights. You are more careless than brave. Careless, brave, tomato, tomato, Kale said, smirking. Just don't call me reckless around engineers. They'll have hissy fits. Serenia's lips twitched into a small, almost imperceptible smile. It wasn't much, but to Kale it was as satisfying as a perfectly functioning hyperdrive. Days drifted into nights that were measured by rotating stars outside the viewport, rather than any planet's cycles. They discovered a system of moons orbiting a gas giant that glittered in greenish hues. On the largest, the surface shimmered with bioluminescent flora that pulsed gently like the heartbeat of some gigantic, unseen organism. Kale touched it, expecting some sticky residue or a mild shock, and got neither. Instead, a faint vibration traveled through the ground. "Earthquake?" he asked, hopping back. Serenia knelt, pressing her hand against the ground. "Life. It moves beneath your feet in ways you do not notice." Kale stared, unimpressed. "Yeah, right, sure. Probably just the local wildlife practicing synchronized tap dancing." She looked at him sharply. "Do humans always make jokes when confronted with the unknown?" "Always," Kale said proudly. "It's how we survive. Confuse predators, distract enemies, annoy friends." Serenia considered this for a moment. Interesting. They spent several rotations of the moon exploring, Kale fumbling through low gravity, while Serenia moved with a lithe, fluid grace that made him simultaneously envious and irritated. She examined the local flora and fauna, her elongated ears twitching at frequencies Kale couldn't detect. She touched the glowing plants, which hummed and pulsed brighter at her presence, and occasionally spoke soft words under her breath. Kale assumed it was either magic or a very polite form of alien profanity. During one foray, Kale tripped over a rock, nothing unusual there, and tumbled into a shallow crater. He landed on his back, blinking at the stars. "Are you hurt?" Serenia asked, extending a hand. Kale coughed, waved her off, and muttered, "Nope, just testing gravity, quality control." She raised an eyebrow. "Your humor is illogical." "I call it advanced survival technique," Kale replied, rolling his eyes dramatically. "Keeps the universe guessing." As night fell, the two returned to the ship. Kale lit a small fire in the makeshift hearth he'd constructed from a broken engine panel. The flames sputtered, casting orange light over the cramped cabin. They ate protein bars and drank recycled water that tasted faintly of metal. Serenia ate with careful precision, her movements deliberate and calm, while Kale munched loudly and made faces at the taste. "You will injure yourself if you eat like that," she said. "I'll take my chances," Kale replied, grinning through a mouthful of chewy protein. "Besides, it builds character." Silence fell, comfortable this time, not forced. The glow of distant stars shimmered through the viewport, and Kale found himself glancing at Serenia more than he cared to admit. She looked out at the stars, long ears framing her profile, eyes reflecting distant galaxies, as if she could see beyond the present. "Kale," she said suddenly, "why did you risk yourself for me? You did not know me, yet you acted." Kale shrugged, poking at the fire with a stick. Sparks flew. "Simple, really. Nobody deserves to be locked in a cage. I've been in tight spots before, and I know what it's like to be helpless. If I can stop that for someone, even one person, it's worth it." Her gaze softened, but she didn't smile. "You are unusual for your kind." "I prefer interesting," Kale said. "Much better than boring." They settled in for the night, the fire casting long shadows over the cabin. Kale's thoughts drifted, unbidden, to the auction, to the way her violet eyes had met his for the first time, to the strange, unspoken connection forming between them. For all his joking, all his bravado, there was a gravity to her presence that demanded attention. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by sparks and the occasional groan of the ship, but it was the first time Kale didn't feel entirely alone. When he woke, Serenia was already awake, studying the stars through the viewport, her face illuminated by the glow of distant suns. "You think they are watching us?" he asked, voice rough. "Who?" "Slavers, pirates, bureaucrats with grudges." Serenia considered this. "Perhaps, but you will face them differently now. You are no longer alone." Kale chuckled. "Yeah, well, let's hope being with me counts as a good strategy because I'm fresh out of proper plans." She didn't respond, only looked out at the expanse of space, her long ears flicking at some sound he couldn't hear. Kale followed her gaze, half expecting a fleet of ships or some cosmic danger. There was nothing. Only stars, endless and indifferent. Yet in that indifferent expanse, Kale felt something stirring, a sense that the universe had shifted just slightly in a way he couldn't yet understand. The girl he had rescued, quiet and sharp, held more than gratitude in her eyes. There was trust and perhaps, in time, something deeper. He leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "Stars above," he muttered. "What have I gotten myself into?" Serenia finally turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Into life, Kale. Into life that is more than survival." Kale laughed softly, the sound almost lost among the hum of the engines. "Life, huh? Sounds complicated." Her lips curved faintly. "It is, but you will learn." And for the first time in years, Kale looked out at the stars not with fear or weariness, but with a cautious spark of hope. The wayfarer's folly cut through space like a stubborn old dog refusing to give up its last breath. Kale tapped the console, coaxing the engines to behave, muttering to himself about the unfairness of hyperdrive warranties. Serenia sat beside him, quiet and poised, her violet eyes scanning the nav display, ears angled in tiny, precise movements that suggested she was listening to far more than just the hum of the ship. "Destination?" Kale asked, finally giving in to curiosity. She pointed to a cluster of asteroids orbiting a dim yellow star. "There, a trading hub. We can gather supplies and information there." Kale whistled. "A hub? You mean like a welcome party with lasers and an awkward buffet?" "Perhaps," she said dryly, "though the lasers may be less welcoming than the buffet." The journey was uneventful in the mechanical sense, but loaded with tension in the human sense. Kale navigated asteroid fields with the kind of reckless confidence born from years of having everything explode at least once. Serenia, meanwhile, studied him from her seat, making occasional notes in her silver notebook. Kale caught her once and asked, writing a memoir about the galaxy's clumsiest pilot. "Observations," she corrected. "There is much to learn from your behavior." He shrugged, grinning, "Glad to be of service. If you're grading, though, I'd like a curve." The trading hub appeared, a jagged skeleton of metal platforms and docking rings spinning slowly around a small planetoid. Lights blinked erratically, and the scent of ionized air and fuel drifted even through the docking clamps. Kale guided the ship into a free berth, skimming just close enough to avoid drawing unwanted attention. Serenia watched him, noting the tiny adjustments he made, the subtle way he read the spin of the docking rings as if they were part of the ship itself. "You are remarkably intuitive," she remarked. Kale snorted. "Intuition? Nah, I just pray a lot and hope the universe is in a good mood." They disembarked, stepping onto the metal platforms that hummed with machinery. The hub was a chaotic maze of traders, smugglers, and beings of every conceivable shape. Merchants hawked exotic goods, crystals that pulsed with inner light, synthetic foods that promised immortality, or at least indigestion, and weapons small enough to hide in a glove compartment yet powerful enough to annihilate a starship. Kale made a face. "Too many options. I feel overwhelmed and underqualified." Serenia's violet eyes swept the crowd. "We are not here to buy," she said. "We are here to observe and gather information." He groaned. "Observation, fine. But do we have to be so serious?" I missed the part where explosions were optional. They wandered through the hub, Serenia quietly questioning merchants in her lilting, melodic language, while Kale attempted to barter for rations without insulting anyone's species. It was a delicate balance. He succeeded only half the time, occasionally winning with charm and more often with the universal tactic of pretending he had no money. As they rounded a corner, Kale froze. Across the platform, a group of figures moved with unnatural coordination. Clad in dark armor, their visors glinting, they exuded menace even without weapons drawn. Bounty hunters, slavers. The kind Kale had hoped never to see again. He muttered, trying to sound casual. "You seeing what I'm seeing?" Serenia's ears twitched. "Yes, they are aware of our presence." Kale swallowed. "Great, time for Plan A. Charm and distraction." "Or Plan B," she corrected. producing a small, crystalline device from her robes. She pressed a button, and a holographic projection sprang up, casting multiple copies of her figure in different locations. The hunters blinked, uncertain which way to move. Kale's mouth fell open. "Cheating, that's cheating." "No," she said, eyes calm. "That is strategy." Kale shrugged, grinning despite himself. "Well, I like it. Very fancy. Next, teach me to make holograms of myself. Could save me from a lot of trouble." They slipped through the crowd, Serenia leading, Kale trying to avoid stepping on toes, tails, or the occasional tentacle. She spoke softly, giving him instructions on how to blend, how to move without drawing notice. Kale made the motions, though he occasionally muttered sarcastic commentary under his breath. By the time they reached a quieter docking ring, Kale was winded but still alive. Serenia tapped a console, pulling up data on shipping manifests, personnel movements, and encrypted communications. "There is unrest," she said. "A faction moves against the ruling council. They will attempt to seize control soon." Kale whistled. "Sounds like a real party. Any chance they serve drinks?" "Focus," she replied without raising her voice. He grinned sheepishly. Right. Gathering intel. Serious business. Got it." Hours passed in a mix of quiet observation and whispered commentary from Kale, who could not resist pointing out every absurd uniform, ridiculous hat, or suspiciously spindly-legged creature they passed. Serenia ignored most of it, jotting notes, scanning data, her face serene but alert. Finally, she looked up. "We have what we need." Kale exhaled, stretching. "Finally. I thought we were going to live here forever, blending in as the hub's entertainment. I've been practicing my juggling act with plasma grenades all morning." Serenia's violet eyes met his. "You adapt well to chaos. It is valuable." Kale chuckled. "Thanks. My mom always said chaos and I are a package deal. She also said I should clean my room, but that's another story." They returned to the ship, the bounty hunters unaware of their movements thanks to Serenia's clever holograms and Kale's luck. Once aboard, Kale leaned back, letting the engines hum beneath him. "You know," he said, glancing at her, "if this whole Queen of the Galaxy thing doesn't work out, we could start a small courier service. I'm good at evading trouble and you're terrifyingly competent." Serenia's lips curved into the smallest, almost imperceptible smile. "Perhaps, but first we survive this night." Kale laughed softly, the tension easing for a moment. "Survival, my favorite pastime, right after chaos and sarcastic commentary." Outside, the stars stretched endlessly, indifferent to the small lives threading their way across the void. But within the cramped cockpit of the Wayfarer's Folly, a human and an alien girl, rescued, wary, and increasingly bound by trust, sat together, planning their next move in a universe that was both hostile and breathtakingly vast. The Wayfarer's Folly glided silently through the void, its patched hull creaking under the gentle tug of a nearby star. Kale sat at the helm, fingers tapping the controls almost absent-mindedly, while Serenia hovered over a holomap, tracing routes and coordinates with precise movements. Her long ears twitched occasionally, catching signals Kale couldn't even perceive. "You really enjoy making maps, don't you?" Kale asked, leaning back in his chair and wincing as the ship shuddered. "Understanding terrain and travel routes is essential," she replied, voice even calm, yet carrying an underlying authority that Kale found slightly intimidating. "It is not enjoyment, it is preparation." Kale grinned. "Preparation, adventure, or planning your empire, all sound the same to me." She glanced at him, violet eyes unamused. "You confuse triviality with survival." "Yeah, well, it keeps me entertained," Kale said, waving a hand. "And let's be honest, it's not like I'm boring anyone else." They had spent weeks hopping between systems, avoiding attention, gathering intelligence, and learning to survive together in ways neither had expected. Kale's humor softened the tension of the long stretches, while Serenia's composure anchored him when danger seemed imminent. She had begun to trust him, and he had started to understand her in a way no one else ever would. As the ship dropped into orbit above a verdant world, Kale's scanner flickered nervously. Energy spikes. Someone's out there, and they're definitely looking for us. Serenia's expression didn't change. Bounty hunters, or worse, political agents of a faction that wishes to destabilize the council of my people. Kale whistled. Worse, huh? Great. I always wanted a cosmic game of hide-and-seek. She didn't smile. This is not a game. Kale shrugged, leaning forward to check the scanners. Technically, every chase I've been in is a game of hide-and-seek, and technically, I always lose spectacularly. Just call me the champion of spectacular failure. Serenia, ignoring his joke, adjusted the trajectory of the ship, sending it on a subtle descent toward a hidden canyon. We must prepare to land. They may follow, but the terrain will conceal us. The ship dipped, hugging the canyon walls. Kale's hands worked instinctively, adjusting thrusters to avoid the jagged cliffs and sudden geysers of gas erupting from fissures in the rock. Okay, I'll admit, he muttered under his breath. This is the first time I've wished I had a pilot's manual for a canyon with exploding rocks. Serenia's eyes flicked to him, ears angled slightly. You improvise remarkably well for one who claims ignorance. Kale grinned. Improvisation, my middle name. Or it would be if my parents didn't hate me enough to name me Kale instead. The ship touched down lightly among the jagged rocks, thrusters hissing as it settled into the shadows. Kale exhaled, wiping a smear of sweat from his forehead. And landed. Intact. Mostly. Only minor scratches. And possibly an existential crisis or two. Serenia stepped to the ramp and surveyed the landing area. We are safe for now, but we cannot linger. We must move quickly and quietly. Kale followed, grumbling about the cramped space and the lack of proper stairs. You know, normal people get to take elevators or ramps that don't look like death traps. Humans are not normal, she said simply. You adapt. Kale smiled, though he winced stepping over jagged stones. I adapt. I also curse a lot. It's a feature. They navigated the canyon carefully, moving through narrow passages and over sharp outcroppings. Serenia's presence was a constant guide. She detected the faint vibrations of approaching footsteps, the distant hum of sensors, the subtle shifts in the air that Kale could never notice. See that? She whispered, stopping suddenly. A faint shimmer in the distance indicated a cloaked patrol moving cautiously along the canyon floor. Kale crouched behind a boulder, heart thudding in rhythm with the sensors. Yep, definitely worse. Definitely someone who would enjoy hurting me. Just my luck. Serenia produced a small device, pressing a button that emitted a low-frequency pulse. The cloaked patrol froze, disoriented by the subtle distortion. Kale blinked. Seriously, that's cheating. It is strategy, she corrected. We survive by understanding and influencing the environment, not by brute force. Kale nodded slowly, impressed despite himself. Yeah, well, I survive mostly by luck, flailing and making noise